Beneath the violet glare of a dying sun, the alien flagship Vortal floated above the smoldering ruin of another human colony. The world below, once a fragile grid of silver towers and green belts, burned in silence, the thin atmosphere failing to carry the screams upward. Commander Karn watched from the bridge, with the casual disinterest of a man reading a dull report. Another conquest. Another world erased. His subordinates worked with quiet efficiency, claws tapping against hollow panels as firestorms raged below. Local resistance lasted only 22 minutes, Commander, one officer said, his tone a mixture of pride and boredom. Ground forces terminated all organized defense after initial orbital strikes. Karin didn't look up. Casualties? Minimal. The humans fought with sticks, sir. Metallic projectiles, crude energy weapons. Primitive. Almost quaint. A low ripple of laughter moved across the bridge. Someone muttered, "Did they even try?" Karn allowed himself a thin smile. "They always try. That's the problem with lesser species. They mistake defiance for strength." He leaned back in his command chair, his dark, ridged armor reflecting the blood-red light of the dying colony. "Wipe the surface clean. Leave nothing standing but the statues we build." Beneath his words was no hatred, no passion, only the calm superiority of a man who had never tasted defeat. To him, the humans were insects clinging to rocks. And today was merely another extermination. Yet a junior officer hesitated before giving the final order. "Sir, orbital scans show heavy subterranean activity on the planet's far side. Civilian populations. We could capture them for study." Karn waved a dismissive hand. "Study what? Their screams? Burn it." Moments later, the planet bloomed with fire. From the bridge windows, it looked almost beautiful, a crown of explosions circling the equator, oceans boiling into steam, continents splitting like dry wood. Karn barely watched. He had seen it 100 times before. The war had begun with rumors, a new species beyond the outer rims, expanding recklessly, fighting back against pirate raids, colonizing worlds faster than their neighbors liked. The Vor Empire struck first, sweeping across human territory with the ease of a hammer crushing eggs. Colony after colony fell in days. But today would be different, though Karn didn't yet know it. He was sipping a bitter cup of heron root when a transmission came through, static at first, then words in the guttural consonants of his own language, spoken by a voice that carried no fear. "This is Earth Command," the message said. "Your forces have trespassed on sovereign territory. Withdraw immediately." Laughter erupted across the bridge. Officers smirked at one another. Someone muttered, "Do they think this is a negotiation?" Karn let the laughter fade before answering, his voice smooth and contemptuous. "This is Vor Empire High Command. We will do to your homeworld what we've done to every other rock you infest. Prepare yourselves." The line went dead. No threats. No pleas. Just silence. Karn leaned back again, amused. Arrogance was easier when victory was inevitable. He ordered the fleet toward Earth. Hours later, when the first advanced ships reached the planet's outer defenses, the crew expected another simple operation. Cut communications, bombard the surface, break resistance. But as the first salvo targeted Earth's orbital satellites, something unexpected happened. From the shadow of the planet, a vessel slipped into view. It wasn't large, certainly not compared to Vor dreadnoughts, but it moved with unsettling precision. Before the Vor crews could react, the vessel released a pulse of energy that didn't destroy systems but shut them down, weapons, shields, even life support flickering off for 30 terrifying seconds. Then it vanished, folding into some kind of distortion that sensors couldn't track. When the disabled ships limped back to the fleet, shaken officers described weapons that left no debris, boarding craft moving like phantoms, soldiers marked with glowing scars under their skin. One captain swore he saw a single human fighter tear through a corvette's hull by hand. Karn dismissed it as hysteria. A trick. A local defense measure. Nothing more. Yet unease stirred beneath his calm exterior. Then came the prisoner. He was dragged aboard the Vor flagship by two soldiers, his wrists bound in magnetic cuffs. A single human, captured after boarding one of the advanced ships during the chaos. Tall. Lean. His face was sun-scorched, his uniform torn, his arms marked by scars like pale lightning frozen into flesh. He didn't look afraid. As per protocol, the Vor medical scanners activated, sweeping the human's body for weapons, diseases, augmentations. Halfway through the scan, the machine emitted a strange series of clicks. Its lenses flickered. Then, in the neutral monotone of its programming, it asked a question none had ever heard from it before. Subject: history inconclusive. Query: has this organism fought a divine-class entity and survived? The bridge fell silent. Karin's eyes narrowed. Repeat that. The scanner obeyed. Same words. Same question. The human smiled faintly, like a man hearing an inside joke. Guess your machine knows something you don't, he said in flawless Vor. His voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who had been through worse than this. Karin studied him. The scars told a story no one present understood. Burns from energy weapons, surgical graft marks, exposure patterns matching deep space radiation, even injuries suggesting close combat with creatures larger than tanks. You fought gods, one officer muttered, half mocking, half uneasy. The human shrugged. Depends what you call a god. His eyes flicked toward the viewing window, toward Earth below. You really don't know what you've done, do you? Karin ignored the tone, though it unsettled him. Arrogance was armor, and his empire wore it well. Execute him, he ordered, turning away. We have a planet to conquer. But before the guards moved, the human added, almost casually, you should have looked at the stars before you came here. Counted how many went dark after you crossed the line. The words lingered after he was dragged away. By the time Vor fleets reached low orbit, strange readings began filling their sensors. Energy spikes. Unfamiliar frequencies. Entire constellations of orbital weapons powering up, platforms the Vor had assumed were abandoned relics. Even stranger, dozens of wormhole signatures bloomed across the outer system, their locations too precise, too organized to be random. Earth wasn't undefended. It was waiting. On the bridge of the Vortal, Karin watched as defense grids unfolded from the planet's surface, like the petals of some vast mechanical flower. Calm, deliberate movements. No panic. No chaos. He felt, for the first time in his career, the faintest edge of unease. Commander, a junior officer whispered, should we call for reinforcements? Karin straightened, forcing confidence back into his voice. Against one planet? No. Crush them before they finish posturing. Yet even as he spoke, a strange thought crept into his mind, one he shoved aside before it could take root. What if the human had been right? What if this wasn't posturing at all? The Vor fleet advanced, weapons charging. On Earth, the defense grids locked on in perfect silence. And above it all, hidden among the orbital shadows, human ships waited. The Vor fleet moved into Earth's orbit like a wall of steel and arrogance, dark silhouettes blotting out the stars. Their flagship, Vortal, drifted at the center, weapons warming with the slow, inevitable confidence of conquerors. On the bridge, Commander Karin stood with hands clasped behind his back, expression unreadable. Every battle before this had been swift, predictable, almost tedious. He expected nothing different here. Shields online. Weapons locked, reported one officer, his tone bordering on boredom. Fire when ready, Karin said. The first plasma lances carved downward toward the planet, bright spears of annihilation meant to cut through orbiting defenses before the ground assault began. But they never reached their targets. The sky fractured. Dozens of luminous hexagonal barriers shimmered into existence around Earth, energy fields snapping together with mathematical precision. The plasma bolts hit and vanished like rain on stone. On the Vor bridge, silence spread like a crack through glass. Karin's jaw tightened. Analysis. Unknown defensive array, the science officer said, struggling to keep his voice steady. Energy signatures, not in our databases. power levels impossible for a single planet. Before Karin could respond, a transmission cut through their comm systems. It was calm, almost conversational, but carried a weight that filled the entire bridge. "You have entered restricted space," the voice said. A human voice. Male, measured, emotionless. "Hostile actions against Earth will be answered with decisive force. This is your first and final warning." The words were simple, but the certainty behind them made Karin feel, for the first time in his life, the faint edge of doubt. "Trace that signal," he ordered sharply. "Already trying, Commander, but it's coming from everywhere. Satellites, drones, orbital platforms, it's a network. Massive. We can't pinpoint the source." On the viewing screens, Earth's night side lit with sudden constellations of blue. Dozens, no, hundreds, of defense stations powered on in perfect synchronization. One officer muttered under his breath, "They were ready for us." Karin ignored him. "Launch the first wave. Overload the barriers. Land troops in every major city. I want Earth burning before their next broadcast." But the first wave never landed. Without warning, wormholes bloomed open around the Vor fleet, perfect, spinning circles of white light tearing through the black of space. From each emerged human ships, sleek and angular, weapons already primed. They didn't fire immediately. They just surrounded the Vor armada with geometric precision, cutting off retreat paths, locking into positions as if every move had been planned days before the Vor even arrived. A second human transmission arrived. Still calm. Still terrifying. "You are contained." Karin felt a cold weight settle in his chest. Contained. Not attacked. Not destroyed. Contained, like vermin in a box. The Vor fleet opened fire anyway, plasma bolts and rail slugs tearing into the void. The human ships moved before each shot even left the barrels, reacting with inhuman precision. They returned fire only once per target. One pulse, one ship erased in a silent implosion, no debris left behind. The Vor officers stared at their screens, disbelief freezing them in place. "Commander, they're not even killing our crews," one said quietly. "Look, escape pods. They're letting survivors go." Karin's claws tapped against his armor. Precision strikes, surgical takedowns, minimal deaths. No rage, no cruelty. This wasn't war as the Vor knew it. This was dissection. He felt, absurdly, as though someone were studying him. "Pull the fleet back," he ordered finally, voice tight. "Regroup beyond lunar orbit. Now." As the Vor ships limped away, Karin watched the human vessels return to formation, blocking pursuit but never crossing into retaliation. They moved with the discipline of machines but unmistakably carried the will of something older, colder, and infinitely patient. He thought of the human prisoner captured earlier, the one with scars like lightning frozen in flesh. "You really don't know what you've done," the man had said. At the time, Karin dismissed it as bravado. Now, as Earth's defense grid remained locked in silent readiness, he wondered if it had been a warning. Later, in the Vor command chamber, political leaders flickered to life on hollow screens. Fat, jeweled ministers in floating palaces far from any battlefield. "Report, Commander," one demanded. "We assume Earth has fallen?" Karin met their expectant gazes, without expression. Negative. The assault was repelled. Shock rippled across the council. Arguments erupted, claims of sabotage, accusations of incompetence, demands for reinforcements. "It was one planet," a minister shouted. "Primitive, fractured, barely industrial by our standards." "Then explain their weapons," Karin snapped, his composure cracking for the first time. "Explain the orbital grids, the wormholes, the precision attacks." The ministers went silent. Finally, the science minister, a thin, pale creature with two large eyes, spoke carefully. "We've recovered fragments from the battle. Telemetry, visual logs. Commander, you should see this." The data appeared before Karin in cold, blue holograms, human war footage pulled from centuries of archives. Cities reduced to ash in minutes. Soldiers fighting in chemical storms. Submarines dueling beneath Arctic ice. skies black with bombers over continents already burning. And through it all, humans enduring, rebuilding, fighting again. One clip showed soldiers laughing in trenches between battles, faces hollow from starvation, yet eyes bright with some fierce, unyielding spark. Another displayed mushroom clouds climbing into the stratosphere while evacuation craft fled burning coastlines. These conflicts, the scientist whispered, were against themselves. Their own species. No one spoke for a long time. Karin felt something he hadn't felt since childhood training drills, watching simulations of ancient war defeats long erased from official history. He felt the first chill of recognition. These scars, he murmured, thinking of the human prisoner again. Not from gods. The scientist nodded slowly.
No.
From surviving themselves. Karin turned away from the screens. The ministers were still arguing, some demanding escalation, others urging caution, but their voices had receded into static. He no longer cared about their politics. For the first time, the Vor commander wondered if his empire had made a mistake that couldn't be undone. He remembered the way the human voice over comms had spoken, calm, almost polite, delivering warnings without threats, as though humanity already knew how this would end. And for the first time in his long career of conquest, Commander Karin felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. Not anger, not pride.
Fear.
The Vor fleet retreated beyond lunar orbit, its once perfect formation now fractured by the loss of dozens of ships. Escape pods drifted in silence, tiny flecks of life against the endless black, waiting for retrieval. On the flagship's bridge, Commander Karin stood unmoving, watching the tactical screens with an expression carved from stone. He did not speak for a long time. The ministers had gone, the hololink severed after another round of accusations and panic. Now only soldiers remained, stiff and silent at their stations. None dared mention the obvious. The Vor Empire, undefeated for centuries, had just been contained by a species barely known a decade ago. Finally, Karin broke the silence. Status of our forces? 38 ships destroyed, said the operations officer, voice tight with disbelief. Crew losses minimal. They let escape pods through their lines. Karin's claws tapped softly against the railing. Not mercy, he thought. Precision. The humans hadn't wasted a single shot. Bring me the prisoner, he ordered. Minutes later, the human was marched back into the command chamber. Still in restraints, still carrying that faint, infuriating calm in his eyes. The scars across his arms and neck caught the cold light, pale against sun-darkened skin. Karin studied him for a long moment. What are you? The man tilted his head, as though considering how much to reveal. Just a soldier. You speak our language, Karin said. We learn fast, the human replied. His voice carried no triumph, no fear, only a quiet certainty. Karin circled him slowly. Those defenses, the ships, the wormholes, that was not the work of a primitive world. The man's mouth twitched, almost a smile. You thought you were fighting farmers with rifles. That was your first mistake. The words sank like blades. Karin felt heat rise beneath his armor, but pushed it down. Anger would serve nothing now. What do you want? He demanded. The human met his eyes steadily. What humanity's always wanted. To be left alone. But you couldn't do that, could you? Karin stared at him, realizing the man truly believed the Vor had awakened something far larger than themselves. When the human was escorted away, Karin remained motionless, replaying the words in his head. He knew empires fell from arrogance long before they fell to weapons. And for the first time, he wondered if this war would end the Vor. Across the empire, panic spread. Civilian networks leaked images of the retreat, of burning shipyards hit by precision strikes far from the front lines. Human fleets had moved beyond Earth's orbit, slipping through wormholes to hit Vor logistics hubs with surgical efficiency. Communications blacked out in entire sectors. No demands.
No threats.
Just silence followed by destruction. In the Vor capital, ministers screamed for retaliation, for superweapons, for extermination. Others urged negotiation, sensing the danger growing by the hour. The political fractures deepened, but Karin ignored them all. He needed information, not arguments. In the command chamber, he reviewed the captured data again, the human war archives his scientists had decrypted. He watched trench lines consumed by fire in war centuries old, soldiers dragging the wounded through mud under artillery storms that lasted weeks. He saw cities rebuilt after nuclear annihilation, fleets launched into orbit decades after global catastrophes that should have ended them. One recording showed two human soldiers sharing a cigarette in the ruins of a burning capital, laughing like old friends though their uniforms were soaked in blood. They fought like creatures who never learned surrender. Karin turned off the display. Fear had begun to coil through the Empire's military ranks. Reports arrived of officers demanding planetary shields for worlds far from the front. Civilian transports clogged hyperspace lanes as entire populations fled systems they thought might be next. And through it all, the humans said nothing. No broadcast claimed victory. No ultimatums came. The silence itself became a weapon. Karin called his senior officers together. They gathered around the tactical table, faces lit by the red glow of the Empire's shrinking front lines. "They are dismantling us," one admiral admitted bitterly. "Not conquering.
Dismantling.
Piece by piece. Then we strike back," another growled. "Burn their colonies. Show them fear." "They have no colonies," Karin said flatly. "Every target we thought we destroyed was bait. They sacrificed worlds to draw us in." The room fell silent. No one had answers. Finally, Karin spoke again, voice low. "We are dealing with a species that treats war like breathing. They have lived through horrors we can barely imagine, and kept going. Tell me, how do you conquer those who do not fear death?" No one replied. That night, alone in his quarters, Karin replayed the battle recordings frame by frame. He watched human ships emerge from wormholes with surgical timing, strike exactly once per target, then vanish before counterfire could land. No wasted shots. No disorder. He had studied war his entire life. He knew the difference between brutality and skill. What he saw in those recordings was worse than either. It was control. Cold, unshaken control, as though humanity had fought wars so long and so often that victory no longer brought anger or joy, only completion. The next morning brought more reports. War shipyards near the rim, gone. Supply convoys, gone. Listening posts, silent. Karin gathered his officers again. Some demanded planetary annihilation weapons, but he knew it was desperation talking. Even if the Empire burned Earth itself, the humans were already beyond it, scattered across fleets and wormholes, and weapons no Vor scientist understood. And beneath his fear, Karin felt something colder taking shape, a realization too large to face directly. The Vor had thought themselves the galaxy's apex power. But what if humanity had never cared about empire, never wanted territory or tribute because they had been preparing for something else entirely? What if this war was only waking them up? For the first time since the campaign began, Karin felt the shape of defeat forming on the horizon. Not today. Not tomorrow. But soon. He dismissed his officers and stood alone before the viewing window, staring at the distant blue arc of Earth. Somewhere down there, the human prisoner waited in his cell, carrying answers Karin wasn't sure he wanted. The next move would decide everything. And for the first time in his long career, Commander Karin no longer knew what move to make. The Vor Empire launched its final counteroffensive 3 days later, summoning every remaining fleet, every reserve ship, every officer with even a trace of loyalty. It was an act of desperation dressed as strength, the kind of move empires made when they sensed the edge of the abyss beneath their feet. Commander Karin stood at the center of it all, silent as the armada assembled around him. Thousands of ships, bristling with weapons, stretched across the black like a wall meant to push humanity back into the shadows. He gave no speeches. He promised no victory. His crew felt the change in him, though he did not speak of it. The certainty he had once carried like armor was gone. Across the void, the humans waited. Their fleets emerged from wormholes one by one, forming a loose sphere that surrounded the Vor ships, but did not close in. No hails. No ultimatums. Just cold, patient silence. Karen studied their formations, searching for flaws, but there were none. Each human vessel moved with mathematical precision, as though following a plan scripted long before this battle began. He thought of the human prisoner in the lower decks, of the scars across his skin, of the warning in his eyes. When the Vor fleet finally opened fire, the void erupted in white fury. Plasma bolts, rail slugs, and missile storms screamed toward the human lines. This time the humans did not dodge. They advanced through the barrage as though it were nothing but weather. And then they struck. No wild salvos, no wasted fire. Each human vessel targeted a single Vor ship, dismantling it with surgical efficiency. Engines first, then weapons, leaving lifeboats drifting untouched. Entire squadrons vanished in minutes. Karen gripped the railing as his command screen bled red. His fleet was dying faster than he could issue orders. Around him, officers shouted bearings, requested reinforcements that no longer existed, cursed in disbelief. "Why aren't they finishing us?" someone demanded, voice breaking. "They could kill us all." Karen had no answer. He watched as human boarding craft cut into his dreadnought escorts, their soldiers flooding corridors with terrifying speed. Security feeds showed them moving like wraiths, faces marked by those same pale scars, weapons cutting down resistance with clinical precision. He remembered the human prisoner saying, "You really don't know what you've done." Now Karen understood. The Vor fleet collapsed within the hour. Flagships cracked open. Cruisers drifted as burning hulks. Survivors fled in escape pods, their signals filling every frequency with pleas for pickup. But the humans never chased. They moved inward, closer to the Vor capital world itself, their fleets folding through wormholes that bloomed open and sealed behind them like doors slamming shut. Every system they entered went dark within hours. Karen knew then that the Empire was finished. Not just its fleets or its armies. The idea of Vor invincibility, the thing that had held their worlds together, was gone, shattered by a species no one had taken seriously until it was too late. He waited for humanity's demands, for some declaration of conquest or revenge. None came. When the human envoy finally arrived, it wasn't on a warship. It came aboard a small vessel, unarmed, carrying only a handful of soldiers and one scarred officer who walked into the Vor capital chamber as though he had all the time in the world. Karen stood to meet him, expecting rage or triumph in the human's face. There was none. Only exhaustion, and something colder beneath it. "You have won," Karen said, forcing the words out like broken metal. The human regarded him for a long moment. "We didn't want this war," he said simply. "But we'll finish it if we must." Karen braced himself for demands of surrender, occupation, humiliation. Instead, the human offered terms: disarmament of the Vor fleets, joint governance of key systems, shared access to trade routes. Not slavery. Not extinction. "You spare us," Karen said slowly, unable to keep the disbelief from his voice. The human's eyes were unreadable. "We don't need an empire. We only need to make sure no one tries this again." Karen felt something hollow open in his chest. Mercy was worse than conquest. Conquest meant rage, hatred, vengeance. Mercy meant humanity didn't consider them worth hating. The ministers signed the accords within the day. The Vor Empire bent its banners, dismantled its fleets, opened its borders to the very species it had once mocked as savages. And through it all, the humans never celebrated. When the last signatures dried, Karen found himself alone with the scarred officer in the silent capital chamber. "You could have ruled everything," Karen said finally. "Why stop here?" The human studied him for a long moment before answering. "Because this was never about ruling. We wanted peace. You taught us we'll never have it unless we make it ourselves." Karen thought of the war footage he had seen, the endless centuries of human conflict, the cities reduced to ash, the soldiers laughing through the smoke. He realized then why humanity fought without anger, without cruelty. For them, war wasn't a moment in history. It was the air they had always breathed. And now that instinct, honed across centuries of killing their own, was turned outward for the first time. The scarred human turned to leave. At the door, he paused and looked back. You thought those scars meant we fought gods, he said quietly.
No. We fought each other.
We survived ourselves. That's why you never had a chance. Long after the humans departed, Karin remained in the empty chamber, listening to the distant sound of war banners being lowered outside. He felt the weight of centuries shifting, the slow death of an empire not by fire or plague, but by fear of what it had awakened. Because humanity had not conquered for power, or wealth, or territory. They had conquered because someone finally made the mistake of letting them remember what they were. And now the galaxy would never forget it.